Hey, welcome to my podcast where I discuss the origins of all sorts of things. I'm your host, Danny Payne, and this is On the Origin of Everything. Today I'm talking about mobile homes. For a long time I wondered, what's mobile about a mobile home? I've never seen them go anywhere. They just sit there, usually in a little community of other mobile homes. Let's get to the bottom of that first. If you live in the United States, you know exactly what a mobile home is. We also call them trailers. But it turns out that you can find mobile homes in other parts of the world, though they don't look quite the same. They're nicer, mostly because they aren't as old as the ones we have here in the States. Also, the term mobile home and trailer are pretty much synonymous, but after 1976 they stopped making them the same way and started calling them manufactured homes, which adhered to new building codes. So a single wide, a double wide, there's even a triple wide, a trailer in a trailer park, a mobile home in a mobile home park could all fall under the category of manufactured homes because they're fabricated off-site, then transported to a location and placed on a non-permanent foundation. That's what makes them mobile, at least more mobile than a regular house. I also got curious about the price difference between a regular house and a manufactured home. There are too many factors involved to report exact numbers, but mobile homes are generally way cheaper, like 4 times cheaper. I saw you could buy a new single-wide for as little as $50,000. Cheap housing like that attracts certain demographic, leading to stigma surrounding that type of housing. We'll get into all that later. But first, some backstory. The roads that led us to the mobile home. In the 1700s, in America, we had the most mobile of mobile homes, the covered wagon. People were hauling all their stuff around with them and living out of those wagons for an extended period of time. Covered wagons were crucial to America's push westward. There were no interstate highways to drive on or hotels to stay at, so the covered wagon was it. In the 1800s in Europe, they had vardos, which are horse-drawn carriages that the Romani people used as a traveling home. If you get a chance to look them up, you should. V-A-R-D-O. Why? Because they're beautiful. They weren't just functional, they were a work of art. So the practice of traveling with your home has been around a long time, and it's still happening now with motorhomes and sprinter vans. #vanlife. But of course, those aren't mobile homes. The mobile homes I'm talking about today are closely connected to the rise of the automobile. As cars became popular among people who could afford them, definitely the upper class, and leisure time became more of a thing, so did leisure travel. The rich had custom-made travel trailers to use for camping. They'd bring along the hired help who would stay in tents surrounding the trailer. This is basically the origin of glamping. In the 1910s and 1920s, we started seeing touring cars. They were built to sleep in, and they could tow a small cargo trailer for all your camping stuff. This led to the rise of the fifth wheel. The first RV came in 1910, and it cost $8,250. That's $267,000 in today's money. It even had a phone line to connect the trailer to the driver. This is some rich people stuff. The rich were also into just traveling by train though, so it's hard to say how many upper class people actually camped like this. Mostly they would just stay in fancy hotels adjacent to the train stations. But since they were wealthy, they could do whichever they wanted. They could do both. I get the impression, though, that there were very few wealthy people spending $300,000 on an RV to go camping every now and then. The less well-to-do folks also wanted to take advantage of their newly acquired leisure time, but because hotels were still too expensive for them, car camping was a viable option. I'm not much of a camper myself. The last time I went camping, I was with friends, and they talked me into it, and enough time had passed since the previous time I'd gone that I could sort of lie to myself, like, yeah, I can do this. It'll be nice. I'll be with friends. I won't even have to sleep in a tent. I'll sleep in the back of the Explorer. It'll be more comfortable that way. Nope. It wasn't more comfortable that way. It sucked. I overestimated how spacious the back of a Ford Explorer actually is, and it was me and my wife. I wasn't even able to back my car up to the campsite because it was one of those where you park your car in the parking lot and then you walk to your campsite. I didn't know that because I didn't book it, and I didn't think to ask the person who did. So we slept in the back of the Explorer, all cramped in there, in a dark parking lot, in the middle of nowhere. And we still had one more night to go. So the next morning we were like, no way, not again. So we broke away from the group to go exploring in the Explorer. but we really just drove around looking for a cabin to rent. We went back to the campsite that evening to hang out with everybody, and when everyone started turning in for the night, we inconspicuously grabbed all our stuff, like our food and our cooler, and acted like we were going to bed, like, "Good night, everybody." And we peeled out of there to get to our nice, warm, comfortable cabin. We didn't tell anybody about this for years. And we recently stayed at that same cabin because it was so awesome. So I guess what I'm saying is that I would not have been one of the many middle-class Americans that rushed to the outdoors for some car camping. I think people were tougher back then, too. I'm soft and indoorsy. I do like nature, though. The world is beautiful and I want to see it, but when I'm done seeing it, I'd like to get back in my car and go home, or go to a hotel or a cabin. The only thing I like about camping is the fire. But to each their own. So, back to our timeline. In the 1930s, the Covered Wagon Company, founded in Detroit, created the first travel trailer factory. This was meant to be an improvement on tent trailers. They were made of wood, with a canvas top. They looked like a big loaf of bread going down the road. But they were equipped with basically everything you could picture an RV having. By 1936, they'd sold over 10,000 of these campers. Airstreams hit the scene right around then, with their awesome streamlined design. That's my pick. If I ever get an RV, it's going to be an Airstream. Everything else to me looks like a tennis shoe. So, okay, it's the 1930s and the RV market is booming. And by that point, there were trailer parks that were really auto courts. Just places for people to park temporarily. But over time, temporary parking turned into more of a permanent thing. This is the beginning of the bad association with trailer parks. The early stages of a new trend always has growing pains. There are no laws established yet to regulate and keep things in order. Sometimes it's an infrastructure issue. Sometimes there's pushback from the community, and that was definitely the case here. All of the above. There was no proper etiquette for car camping at first. People would show up and litter everywhere and be loud all hours of the night, and the locals hated it. Some towns restricted trailer parks altogether. Another problem was that there weren't enough of these auto courts to accommodate all the demand, so the overflow spilled into other areas, parking anywhere, making more locals angry. Cities started implementing ordinances stating where you could and couldn't park your trailer, time limits on how long you could stay there, etc. Another factor that influenced stigma toward trailer parks was that many folks who were living out of these trailers were blue-collar, low-income people following work, going from job site to job site. Sometimes these men had their whole families with them, more occupants than the trailer was designed to support. And not all of these trailers were Airstreams. A lot of them were janky, slapped-together pieces of junk. So even though they meant no harm by being there, even if they were only there to work and get by, a bad association developed. People who live in trailer parks are dirty and poor and they're not part of our town, transients, riffraff. By the way, we've been using the term riffraff since the late 15th century. Even then, it meant persons of disreputable character or low degree. It comes from an even earlier mid-14th century Anglo-French term riff et raff, meaning one and all, everybody, every scrap, everything. And also, sweepings, refuse, things of small value. Pretty cool. You know I'm always going to try to sneak some etymology into these episodes. Riffraff is such a strange term that I had to go looking. Okay, now that that's out of my system, let's move on to the 1940s. During World War II, no one produced travel trailers because it was against the rules to sell them privately during wartime. They needed all that valuable material for the war effort, not leisure travel. However, after some convincing, several manufacturers managed to get clearance to produce some, specifically for soldiers, sailors, and their families. 800 trailer companies existed before the war, and only 80 remained after the war. Many of those companies that survived were the ones who were allowed to build trailers as critical material use for military personnel. These trailers were limited to a couple of approved designs, and war workers had bad experiences with them. They were not ergonomic, the space was confining, and this may have helped to perpetuate the negative connotations toward trailers. After the war, there was a huge housing shortage, and as veterans returned home and wanted to start families, they flocked to the suburbs in search of affordable housing. Only there wasn't any. The quick fix was to develop mobile home parks all over suburban America. By 1948, approximately 7% of the population lived in a trailer. This was the golden age of mobile homes. 1950s trailer homes were gorgeous. Tons of expos, new innovations, they were classy and streamlined. In the late 50s, they got bigger, adding levels and making them wider. Seniors on a fixed income could afford to move to Florida and rent a nice trailer home to live out their golden years in the warm, sunny climate. This was when the dramatic shift in demographics in Florida began. In the 60s came the design we all associate with the rundown trailers we see in trailer parks today. But at the time they were built, they looked really cool, very mid-century. In 1976, Congress passed the National Manufactured Housing Construction and Safety Standards Act, which held the industry to a higher standard of quality and safety in their construction. I mean, people were living in them full-time, not trailering them to a campsite a couple of times a year, so building code had to change to make sure they were built to last and were safe to live in. 1970s mobile homes were more basic-looking, brown and beige, possibly due to this new regulation, an increased building cost that had to be offset in other ways, like skimping on design or eliminating any extras. These mobile homes were considerably more plain, but they have lasted. They don't look great, but they're still standing. There are a ton of these 70s trailer parks where I live, and man, when we went to Key West, we decided to drive up the eastern coast of Florida all the way to Georgia, just to see a bit of the state since we'd never been there. I still can't believe how many trailer parks we saw. Try to imagine as many trailers as you can. Like the maximum amount you could conjure in your mind. Then multiply that by 10. There are so many more than you think. As numerous as the grains of sand on a beach. That should be their license plate, not the oranges, just a trailer being swallowed up by a Burmese python. Anyway, that's the origin story of the mobile home. The historical impact of mobile homes was huge. They provided people of the early 1900s with an escape from their urban lives to reconnect with nature in their tent trailers and campers. Mobile homes served as an affordable housing option for traveling workers, seniors on a fixed income, or any lower-class person. Today, manufactured homes offer square footage at a fraction of the cost of a regular house. And with the current housing shortage, and real estate prices skyrocketing, it'll be interesting to see if history repeats itself. What will be the new attractive affordable housing option? Maybe tiny houses will be the new mobile home. We shall see. Stick around for part 2 right after this. This episode is brought to you by Nothing. To help keep ads off this show, consider donating by clicking the Patreon link in the show notes, or by going to patreon.com/ontheoriginofeverything. Another way you can support the show is by giving it a 5-star rating and review, or by following it, or sharing it. Let's build a community of people that are curious and always learning. Now, back to the show. Part 2 of today's episode is on van life. If you're like me, you spend way too much time on Instagram and TikTok, and we've all seen the many accounts of people living out of their Sprinter vans, making it look as glamorous as possible, like the ultimate life hack. No job, no responsibilities, just traveling and seeing good sunsets with their dog or significant other, living off of sponsorships. How did this trend come about, and why? Well, you can't do van life without a van, so what's the origin of the van? The word itself is a shortening of caravan, a 16th century reference to a company of travelers, pilgrims, or merchants going together. Also a 17th century definition, any large number of persons traveling together with much baggage. There was a string of precursors that led to the van, starting with wagons that were used for transporting goods in the 19th century. In 1880, an Englishman named William Gordon Stables commissioned what he called a land yacht to travel around on holiday. It looked a lot like a wooden passenger train car on wagon wheels, pulled by 2 horses. It's not a van, but it was furnished to live in while traveling around. So you could point to this as the first recorded occurrence of van life activity, since it wasn't a wagon or a handcart or a vardo, and he literally called his land yacht a van, and used the term van dweller in his memoir. But that was just one rich dude in 1880. In 1896, we saw the world's first motorized truck, invented by Gottlieb Daimler. It wasn't a van, but it was the first motor vehicle meant for transporting things, a predecessor to cargo vans. That same year, Benz, the same Benz that would later be Mercedes-Benz, invented a motorized combination delivery vehicle, which was enclosed, and from what I could find, this was the first modern van. Mercedes-Benz really likes to think so too. I mentioned before that touring cars came around in the 1910s and 1920s, along with the first RV that was astronomically expensive. So we covered that already, and the only reason to bring it up now is to show that traveling in a vehicle equipped with sleeping, cooking, and living accommodations was becoming more widespread. Finally, in 1949, manufacturer DKW in Germany released the DKW Schnelllister. If you get a chance to look it up, this thing was adorable. Schnelllister in English means rapid transporter, though it wasn't very fast at all with only 20 horsepower. Right behind the Schnelllister was the iconic Volkswagen bus, introduced in 1950. Some historians say that this was the first van and everything before it was a large car like a station wagon, a truck, or a bus. Well, I hate to ruin a good story, but the Schnelllister to me looks a lot like the VW bus, and it hit the market a year earlier, since we're concerned with firsts on this podcast. But who has ever heard of the Schnelllister? In contrast, the Volkswagen bus was on the cover of a Bob Dylan album. The Volkswagen bus obviously had the most cultural impact. People loved that they were a more economical alternative to those big station wagons. They were more roomy and more versatile. Right away, people were customizing them for their own needs, like camping, hauling things, general traveling, or touring in a band. They quickly became a symbol for the counterculture movement of the 1960s, rebelling against the country's role as a nuclear superpower, against an economy dependent on consumerism, against Detroit pumping out overpowered V8 behemoths. The microbus's lesser extravagance was a statement against all that, at least for some consumers. Even its boxy design was in contrast with the curved lines of the cars that had come before them. And most importantly, these Volkswagen buses kick-started van life culture. It was appealing to the person wanting to detach themselves from the mainstream expectations to go to school, start a career, buy a house, fill it with stuff, start a family, and be a cog in the great socioeconomic machine. They were closely associated with hippies, of course. This was the birth of van life. In the 80s, van life popularity waned due to a shift away from the anti-establishment rebellion of the 60s and 70s. America, generally speaking, doubled down on conservative values in the 80s. Reaganomics, the fall of communism, the rise of yuppie culture were antithetical to van life values. The RV industry was also on the rise, offering a more attractive option for living nomadically, as RVs were way more spacious than vans. There was a resurgence of van life in the early 2000s. The Sprinter van, by no other than Mercedes-Benz, became a popular high-end option. Sprinter vans are manufactured as cargo vans, but people loved and still love how spacious they are, perfect for living in. The advent of the internet also helped the van life trend to come back. In 2012, the first van life hashtag was created by a fashion designer named Foster Huntington, who quit his design job to go live on the road in his van. As he documented and shared his travels online, he often experienced van trouble, among other problems, so his van life hashtag was originally meant to be a sarcastic joke, as opposed to some inspirational thing, which is what it would later become. Then COVID happened, which further increased van life participation as many people began to work remotely and realized they could do their jobs from pretty much anywhere. It will be interesting to see how electric vehicles, high gas prices, and rising housing costs will affect van life's popularity. Maybe I'm romanticizing this too much, but I like to think that van life taps into our nomadic heritage, back to our hunter-gatherer roots, before agriculture and permanent settlements. Being on the road also feels like the spirit of America. Car culture has been huge here, but van life has become a global phenomenon. And why shouldn't it? We live in a beautiful world. It's such a shame that most of us either have to or choose to spend most of our lives in one small corner of it. Van life may have started out with strong opinions about the establishment and pushing back against the mainstream, but today it seems more chill. The overall vibe feels less political and more focused on appreciating nature, travel, and embracing a simpler, minimalist lifestyle. I can get behind that. I still don't like camping, and living out of a van seems like a bigger, cluttered, smelly mess than influencers would let on, but I can appreciate the principle of it all. See more of the world, accumulate less stuff, and strive to be less stressed? Not a bad sales pitch. That's all for today. I hope you learned as much as I did and that you gained an appreciation for the mobile home park you live in or the ones you drive by every day. They're a part of some very important and very interesting history. If this inspired you to take a road trip, go camping, or stay in a cabin like we did, write in to tell me how it went and where you went. I'd love to hear all about it. Until next time, so long. Research, music, and production was all done by Jezere Wilson. This podcast is listener-supported, owned and operated by Jez and myself, under the On the Origin of Everything LLC in the United States. All rights reserved. We can be reached via email at info@ontheoriginpod.com.